Why play Anima Squad? Well, you might be looking for a relatively easy comp to play where all the units are pretty recognizable. You have flexible items that you can play either towards AP or AD, and you want to play a comp that can make use of both. You want to play a tempo vertical trait, so a trait that you can push levels and try and reach the highest high of caps while still maintaining that you're all playing units that share a synergy and building deep into that synergy. Or you have an enabling augment or emblem that can really work with Anima Squad, because there are a couple of them that are Anima Squad specific that can help you to reach those high highs. However, it can be really dependent on high rolling. This is a comp that works best when you're tempoing and playing very aggressively. So if the lobby is playing more safe or there's a lot of rerolls, it can be very hard unless you're high rolling. It's also difficult aside from having a tempo opener. This isn't something you can easily pivot into or play around. It's usually something that you play from being very far ahead in your early game, making a very specific comp in some situations. And it's also really reliant on 5 costs. If you ever get stuck on level 8 or you don't find particular 5 costs in order to cap out your board, you can end up in a pretty bad spot. Now, before we get much further, make sure to like and subscribe. I'm going to the whole how to play series, going through as many of the different comps as possible, but on my channel I do post guides for set 14, so if you're looking to get the most out of your set 14 experience, please make sure to like and subscribe because it does help me out as a content creator. Now, what is Anima Squad, you might be asking yourself? Well, Anima Squad is one of the primary vertical traits that you would play around. By vertical trait, I just mean it's one of those traits that you want to play super deep, that a lot of the units in the set have synergy. So as you can see, Anima Squad has different breakpoints of 3, 5, 7, and 10. 10 which requires 2 Anima Squad emblems and is the Giga, almost like instant win type of thing because it's a 10 trait. With Anima Squad, basically the main mechanic is that at each tier, so 3, 5, 7, and 10, you pick a weapon that then a random Anima Squad champion will fire, and firing it is based on the actual ability description. So if you read like the weapon that you pick, it will have a description while you pick it that says like every 6 seconds fire a whatever, or throw a boomerang or whatever. So it's really fun, it's really interesting. So a lot of damage actually tied to the Anima trait, which is why the vertical trait is really popular. Additionally, the Anima Squad champions will gain armor, magic resist, and damage amp. So as you can see, 3, 5, 7, and 10, they'll have some extra armor and MR and some damage amp, in addition to choosing the weapon. The weapons also scale with the star level and the stage, so it also works really well into late game, and upgrading the units has a good effect. So often like in a caretaker's favor or stuff like that, you can also get a little bit more juice or benefit. Now, what are the Anima Squad weapons? I made this slide. It's a little bit cumbersome, but I'll explain through it. Basically, at each tier, you have a selection of Anima Squad weapons. So 3 Anima, 5 Anima, 7 Anima, and 10 Anima, and these are the names of them. I'm not going to go into the detailed descriptions of each item because then I think that's a little bit too much for the video. But basically, the main thing that you need to know is that of your options when you're picking 3, 5, 7, or 10, some of the items deal primarily physical damage, or AD. Some of them deal magic damage, or AP. Or work off ability power scaling. So when you look at these different items, a lot of times you should be thinking or structuring it based on whether you have Shred or Sunder. So this is a comp where you have a lot of flexibility in terms of which units do what. Like there's some units in the comp that can hold AD items really well and do a lot of damage. The primary 4 cost carry for this comp is an AD carry, but the 5 cost, so the highest high cap of the board, is to play towards AP in the form of Aurora. So when you think about it, whatever your early game is or whatever your mid game is, a lot of times is how you're going to pick your Anima Squad weapons. As a general rule of thumb, I would take weapons that match if you have Sunder or Shred. In other words, if you're playing more towards AD items and trying to primary carry an AD unit, I would take the Anima Squad weapons that are AD focused. So for example, in the 3 Anima, Uwu Blaster, in the 5 Anima, Animines, in the 7 Anima, Gatling Bunny Guns, etc. However, because you're eventually going to be capping your board around both Sunder and Shred, or both physical and AP damage, you can do a mixture of both. The highest cap generally is like to play around like Shred more, because if you hit Aurora and you hit your 5 cost, she's going to be doing most of the damage. However, for most consistency and for ease of use and ease of play, a lot of times you're stabilizing around Sunder and your AD around the Zaya, which is the 4 cost unit. So a lot of times the AD ones are a little bit better. Another thing to note is that Alawi has a little bit of a shred effect. That's why I put her here with the shred items. She reduces magic resist. So if you have an early Alawi or if you have an early upgraded Alawi, it might change your opinion on whether or not you're going to be playing AP or AD. Additionally, Leona also makes you take additional magic damage. So the magic ones are all good. I also like amongst the tiers, I kind of like between the ones that in a single tier, there's different options of AP and AD. So for example, in 3 Anima, there's Uwu Blasters and Bladerang. I think Uwu Blasters is better. It just looks like it does way more. Bladerang, it can even miss sometimes. I've had my Bladerang miss when I'm playing. I don't like Bladerang. In terms of the 5 Anima, I think Searing Short Bow is a little bit better than Vortex Glove. 7 Anima, I have the white border around the Annihilator. This one's a little bit more specific. It does true damage based on max HP. So if you're fighting boards that have a lot of HP, or you're going into like reroll boards, for example, where the boards have a lot of HP, then Annihilator, whether you have Sunder or Shred, is going to be a good option. So that's like a good pick in those type of situations as well. So when should you play Anima Squad? A lot of times if you have mixed items, it's a pretty good comp. You're also trying to play it from a tempo opener. So a lot of times you're just trying to make as many early items as possible. You have some built-in shredding with Alawi and a little bit of extra damage that you can do for magic damage with Leona. So sometimes making AP items works out really nicely. Here I put IE because IE works really well with Zaya, who is in the comp. Additionally, you can play around Aurora and just make AP items and carry some AP units until you can hit the Aurora. But typically you're going to be stabilizing around AD items, so I would lean more towards AD items and utility items. This comp is also really good with an Anima Squad emblem because so much of the damage is tied to the Anima trait. If you can hit those higher tiers of Anima a lot more consistently, as well as give yourself more flexibility to play more expensive and better units on your board, then an Anima Squad emblem is like, it synergizes with the idea of tempoing and playing around the board really well. You want to be strong early with this comp because you want to try and be able to make it to level 9. You want to have a lot of HP to have many options in order to find that Aurora. If you hit Aurora 2, you basically can win the game. If you don't hit Aurora 2, you might have a little bit of a struggle getting to that top 4. Additionally, there's lots of augments that also work really well with Anima Squad. There's Anima Squad Crest, which gives you the emblem. There's also Support Spire and power leveling, both of which can help you to tempo. Power leveling in a more direct way of just giving you XP, and Support Spire basically giving you this extra effect on your board that can basically help you win a lot of the early game fights. I'm not sure how strong Support Spire and power leveling is. I've seen them both be completely bait or be completely good. I would say that you should not take Anima Squad, Support Squire, or Powering Level. You shouldn't take any of these augments unless you already have a good Anima spot. For example, if you're starting the game off with like a Silas 2 and you hit power leveling, maybe you go for it. If you hit if you have a Seraphine 2 and a Silas 2 and a Alawi and you hit Anima Squad Crest, maybe you just take it. There's stuff like that where it makes sense, but in a lot of the cases, I wouldn't necessarily force towards it, because if you're trying to force yourself to tempo and to play aggressively, and then you don't end up being the strongest in the lobby, and you lose a lot of fights, and you don't have HP, and then everything's bad, and it's sad, and you just lose the game, and then you're going to say that this comp sucks, and blah, 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 and you're just going to be angry and upset. Just play it from ahead, right? Play it from a good spot. Additionally, one of the other augments that works really well with this comp, these aren't all the augments, but I'm just trying to select the few that I think are noteworthy. Quality over quantity. This is the one where you give one item to each unit and then it upgrades it to a radiant item. This works really well with Anima Squad because you have a lot of stability in the damage of the Anima weapons that you select. So quality over quantity actually makes it really easy for you to manage your items amongst your different units, like having enough frontline items as well as having items for your backline carries. So it actually works really well. So make sure to try it out. It's definitely a good option. So let's talk about our final boards. Before we do that, we're just going to quickly go over the Anima units. So if you look at the Anima units, there are 8 Anima units. So you have a little bit of flexibility if you're trying to play around 7 Anima into your late game. Specifically, there's also an inter-team synergy of Silas and Leona, so you do have a little bit of frontline, and additionally you get some extra resistances, so armor and magic resist, from the Anima Squad trait. So it works really nicely with this board to have a nice little cohesive start of your game. Now, when you're playing around your early game and your mid game, you have a lot of different options in your early game around these carries, but late game, you want to primarily carry around Aurora and Xayah. So let's talk about these items first. Xayah is a marksman, but a lot of times when you're playing Anima squad, you don't really have room for a marksman. A lot of times in these cases, you usually just play an extra frontline unit, or you try and play around a 5 cost. A lot of times you're going to drop one of these lower cost units. Often it's Vayne, I think, that gets dropped, or Yuumi, one or the other. But a lot of times you're dropping one of these 2 units, and then you're trying to cap out around 5 costs. So you play 7 Anima. If you're trying to tempo this and make it to level 9, a lot of times you'll play the other broken 5 costs or the other really good 5 costs. You'll just play Viego and Renekton. Now, Xayah is a marksman, so you could play a marksman, right? In place of Renekton or in place of some of these other units, you can play an Aphelios. Of course, I understand that. He synergizes really well. You get Golden Ox in and you get Marksman. However, because you're doing so much damage with the Anima trait and you're trying to tempo and play around Aurora, a lot of times, unless you're stuck on level 8, you kind of want to play higher quality units. You'll do more damage. Instead of just giving her Marksman, you'll do more damage if you just give Viego and Renekton items or play Aurora and give Aurora full items. But typically your board looks something like this. A lot of times it works better if you have an Anima squad emblem, because that way you're able to drop another unit and then you can actually fit in the marksman and then you can play Aphelios. So if you have an Anima squad emblem, you can put Anima squad emblem on somebody, fit in some extra synergies, and make like the left side of your screen light up. If you don't have an Anima squad emblem, it becomes a little bit more dodgy, and then you have to play something like this, and then these 5 costs are flexible. You can play Garen to cap out your board. You can also play like another Bastion, right? Like you can play a Sejuani, right? If you don't have Renekton, if you don't have Viego, you can play a Strategist as well, just because you have the synergy with Yuumi. And then if you really have to, if you think that your front line is stable enough, you can play a Marksman to help out Xayah, of course, right? You can always play a Marksman to help out Xayah, but you have a lot of options. But basically, it's just like adding a unit that makes sense, that gives you a synergy for your board. Ideally, frontline to try and stall out for your board to be as strong as possible. Let's go through items now. In terms of items, I think Xayah really likes to have IE. You want her ability to do as much damage as possible, and she kind of just steamrolls the opponent. A lot of times, because you're playing around either Sunder or Shred, and you're usually doing mixed damage, sometimes you take a variety of the Anima squad weapons, right? Sometimes you'll take weapons that are both the physical and the special, or like the AP and AD items from the Anima squad weapons. So in that case, you want to usually have like Shred and Sunder on your board. It works really nicely to just make a Last Whisper, because it helps the Xayah stabilize a lot of the damage, and if you're taking early game Shred or Sunder items, it can work. If you're taking early items that scale off of Sundering, then it works out really well to cap out your board with the Xayah. Last time on Xayah, usually people put Shojin because it helps her to cast a lot. Shojin is a relatively safe pick, but I personally think it's pretty low cap. Now, I don't want to piss anybody off, and I don't want, like, you know, all the people who like study the websites of like guides and stuff to tell me that you need to have Shojin on Xayah. I don't think it's super necessary. When I look at Xayah, the more I see her and the more I play her, she feels more like a Corki, in that you just want to give her a 3rd damage item. I really like putting like a Giant Slayer on her, just give her a bunch of damage amp to scale off the crit chance, or even a Guard Breaker. I think triple damage item is a little bit better than Shojin. It's just a little bit riskier because you're relying on your front line to live long enough for the Xayah to cast, instead of having a little bit more consistent earlier damage with the Shojin getting her to her cast earlier. So I just wanted to point that out. I'm going to put the Shojin there so that nobody gets angry at me, because, like, you know, as soon as I say something that's different from a website, I have like 100 comments telling me, no, not 100, but I have at least one telling me that I don't know what I'm talking about. But I just want to make it very clear. It's more for high cap that I'm talking about here. Aurora Archangels is pretty good on her if your front line could sustain it. Aurora jumps on the bench, so she actually she stays away from the combat long enough that the Archangels actually gets a lot of value. So it's a really efficient use of items, and it can work really well. Aurora also hits a lot of units. She's one of the best holders of Morello, so a lot of times you can put Morello and then just apply anti-heal very well. Morello is also a really good tempo item because anti-heal early can help you out a lot. So a lot of times if you make an early Morello, you can play towards Anima and not be punished, because it's a really good Aurora item. Lastly, you usually go for like, I usually like to just go for more damage. Jewel Gauntlet is good, just make the ult crit. You can also go for, like, you know, if you need the Shred and you don't have it on another unit, you can go for like a Shiv. You can also go for like a Shojin to make her cast a little bit more, but typically you're just trying to scale up her damage as much as possible. I usually like to just give her a JG. Of course, you don't need Archangels, you don't need JG. Aurora's pretty flexible on her item because she does so much damage. I would just suggest making sure that she has Morello, and Archangels is usually okay. If you don't have Archangels, like I said, you can make other AP items or other damage amp items, all of which are totally fine. In terms of your frontline items, you're just trying to make as tanky items as possible. You get a little bit of armor and you get a little bit of shielding or durability from Vanguard. So a lot of times just like base HP can help out a little bit. I would just build Leona like a Giga Tank. A lot of times just like the Giga Tank items is like, the duplicate everything, like Warmogs, Dragon Claw, and where's Bramble? I always have trouble finding one of the items. My bad. And Bramble. Just stack her up with as much resistance, as much HP as possible, because Leona has to survive long enough. The longer you survive, you basically get more procs of the Anima squad weapons doing damage, which works really well. You can have Aurora scale, and you can give Xayah time to do damage. It works out really nicely. Of course, any items work out well here. One thing I was mentioning before that I'll just highlight here, Leona also scales off her magic resist to make bonus magic damage from other allies' abilities, so she can kind of make magic damage be more effective, which actually works really nice because if you have the Aurora, she can just like do more damage. Also, the Anima squad weapons, if you're playing more towards AP and you think that you can tempo really aggressively to play around these units, you can also take more, the units will take more damage from the Anima squad weapons as well. Because she has like a casting ability as well, I really like Protector's Vow on her. I don't know if it's that good on her though, but typically like, when you have a unit that has like a stun, she has like a little bit of a stun and a cast, it kind of works out nicely. But even like other AP tank items can also work out nicely. Then in terms of the rest of your items, a lot of times you're playing around Renekton and Viego. In terms of reroll, there's not really many reroll spots with this comp. Two of the units that do some work, Yuumi, but usually you play her more into strategist, so it's not a really good reroll. Seraphine you can reroll, but then you're usually pivoting and playing into Techie. And then there's also Vayne reroll. Vayne reroll I think could work with Anima squad, but a lot of times you play just Vertical Slayer with her. Guinsoo, Runans, and usually with the Runans augment is when you want to play Vayne. If you don't have the Runans augment, the one I'm talking about, category 5, that is an augment that gives you a Runans and it powers up the Runans. If you don't have that augment, I don't think Vayne reroll is super viable, so usually you don't worry about it. But this is typically what you're aiming for, and then like I said, if you have an emblem, you can cap a lot higher because you can fit in extra synergies, fit in extra frontline, and play a little bit stronger, play a little bit of a stronger board. But this is typically what you go for. Now, in terms of your early game and your pivot options, oops, sorry, I have too many tabs open. Your early game, a lot of times you just really want to have an early 5 Anima. So a lot of times you're playing around these units, and then you're either deciding to make AD items or AP items. A lot of times something like this works really well if you have a Jarvan as well in your mid game, because you can just play something like this. It's a little bit difficult. You basically want to try and get to the higher tiers of Anima squad, because the Anima squad weapons do so much damage that actually makes you extremely strong relative to the rest of the lobby. However, it is really reliant on you having an early game tempo and being able to play that. In terms of your pivot options, you do have quite a bit. If you're playing around Anima squad, a lot of times you have mixed weapons, right? You have AP and AD items that you're trying to play towards. Playing around MF is actually a good option when you can play like a Dynamo board. You can play a Dynamo Flex board, and then put the like your AD items on MF and your AP items on Aurora. So it actually works as a really nice pivot point, and this can be played pretty easily with Vanguard as well. So on like a level 8 roll down, if you're rolling down and you don't hit a Xayah and you hit MF instead, you have some sort of option that you can play around, which is Dynamo. It's not necessarily the strongest comp, I understand that, but it is a flexible option. Additionally, you can also play around Marksman Vanguards. This isn't that strong of a board once again. This is like a bread and butter. You just get a 4th and you get out. I already talked about it a lot. I'm not saying it's a strong board to just play 4 Vanguard, 4 Marksman, but that is also an option because of the inter-team synergies of Vanguard with Anima squad. I'm looking for Jhin and Kindred and some other Vanguards. This guy and this guy. Right, like this is a board that you can play. It's a pretty simple board, but it's just a matter of what you hit and what items you have and how you can pivot around it. So you do have some other options. Of course, you can just like widely pivot into anything where you're using an IE, but there are other options, like I said, namely like MF is a good option, and the other one. If you have like Guinsoo components, if you're playing around like Vayne, for example, and you made an early Guinsoo to tempo, then you can also pivot into like a Zeri board, and that can also work out for you in some ways. Additionally, if you have primarily AP items and you're playing around Seraphine, then you can play more into Techie and you can just play Brand, right? So Techie is a pretty strong option. techies, right? Like playing around 6 techie is actually a pretty strong option for you, because like there's this board where you play what is it, this and Ziggs, right? This is another pivot option if you have AP items. It's a little bit of a harder pivot, but if you're playing around like early techie around the Seraphine with Anima squad, you can also pivot into something like this. Now, what are your conditions for success? So we talked about it a lot during the video, but basically you want to have a very strong early game. If you don't have like Anima squad in early, this isn't really a comp that you can easily pivot into unless you like hit an Aurora on a roll down. It's not something that's always going to work out. It's just because like you really want to have the HP and the gold advantage to be able to make it to level 9 in order to hit the 5 cost. If you hit the 5 cost, you'll usually cap out really high, because obviously if you have Aurora 2, Viego 2, Renekton 2, you're probably winning the game for free. You also have other flexible options, right? Like any of these, excuse me, let me clear board. Like anybody can work really well, right? Like all of these 5 costs are pretty much playable on the board. You can play Zac, just have extra frontline. Renekton obviously is good. Garen, you can just spread Anima squad on other units, which is pretty valuable because you're playing deep into a vertical trait, so it gives a lot of stats. Aurora obviously synergizing works really well, and Viego obviously broken. So those are some options. And then you want to have good econ, like I said. Often you want to be ahead of the lobby and have lots of items. This is a comp that could accept a lot of items because you can itemize multiple of the 5 costs and do really well into your late game. So if you're playing this comp in something like Scuttle Puddle, for example, where everybody is basically playing really aggressive and has a lot of gold to be able to play a lot of 5 costs on level 9, this is a great comp that you can play in Scuttle Puddle to try and cap very high if you have a good opener for it. Scuttle Puddle or Crab Rave, right? Those ones that give you a lot of gold. Ideally, you also want to be uncontested because it's going to be hard for you to hit everything. Usually with 4 cost comps, you don't care if you're contested by 1 or 2 people, but in this case, because you need to tempo pretty aggressively, you want to be uncontested to make sure that you have free reign of hitting all of the units that you can. Additionally, augments to support it also work really well. You're usually not that strong unless you hit the 5 cost, so make sure to be really careful about that. Obviously, if you have like prismatic opener, you have those really good leveling augments, this can be a good comp for it, but you're not very strong unless you hit the 5 cost, so make sure that you're playing it from ahead. You want to be really strong in your early game. That's the most important thing. Anyways, thanks for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe because it does help me out, and thank you for watching. Hopefully this was helpful in some way. I tried my best to explain the comp and explain many of the different facets of it, and I'm going to try and do this for many of the other comps as I go through them. If you need more resources, by the way, I took these from Meta TFT, so you can actually see the descriptions on some of the items, I believe. These pictures, you can see the descriptions on Meta TFT. I just want to make sure that I cite my sources because I realized that I didn't put it in the slide. Thanks for watching. Have a great day and see you. Bye-bye.